We start this hour with the latest on the U.S. election. Republican Vice President Mike Pence and Democratic Vice Presidential candidate Kamala Harris are squaring off in a televised debate. As expected, the pandemic has dominated the discussion. The tone has been much calmer compared to the first presidential debate last week. Harris started by attacking the administration's response to the public health crisis, prompting a sharp response from Pence.
They knew and they covered it up. The president said it was a hoax. They minimized the seriousness of it. The president said you're on one side of his ledger if you wear a mask, you're on the other side of his ledger if you don't. And in spite of all of that, today they still don't have a plan.
The reality is, when you look at the Biden plan, it reads an awful lot like what President Trump and I and our task force have been doing every step of the way. I mean, quite frankly, when I look at their plan that talks about advancing testing, creating new PPE, developing a vaccine, it looks a little bit like plagiarism.
The 90-minute event is taking place in the western state of Utah, where coronavirus cases are on the rise. Organizers have taken precautions now that President Donald Trump and several of his top advisors have been infected. The candidates are seated 12 feet apart on stage with plexiglass barriers between them. The two also discussed health care and the economy. With less than a month to go until the November 3rd vote, opinion polls suggest that Democratic presidential candidate Joe Biden has a significant lead over Trump. Viewers will be watching whether Pence can win over undecided voters or whether Harris can extend Biden's lead in her bid to become the country's first female vice president. We will have more on this developing story in the coming hours. Meanwhile, Trump says he's recovering less than a week after being diagnosed with COVID-19. The 74-year-old posted a video message online crediting an experimental drug he received in hospital. He also said it was a blessing that he had been infected.
I think this was a blessing from God that I caught it. This was a blessing in disguise. I caught it. I heard about this drug. I said, let me take it. It was my suggestion. I said, let me take it. And it was incredible the way it worked, incredible. And I think if I didn't catch it, we'd be looking at that like a number of other drugs. But it really did a fantastic job. I want to get for you what I got, and I'm going to make it free. You're not going to pay for it.
Officials say Trump was back working in the Oval Office on Wednesday, even as the White House wrestles with a growing outbreak there. More than a dozen people in Trump's inner circle have tested positive so far. The president's physician released a statement saying that his oxygen levels remain normal and that he's been symptom-free for over 24 hours. It also said blood tests from Monday showed detectable levels of antibodies. Trump is one of more than 7.5 million people in the country to contract the virus. Over 210,000 have died. Two Islamic State militants from Britain have appeared in court in the U.S. on terrorism charges. They were allegedly involved in the killing of 4 Americans and 2 Japanese hostages in Syria.
The defendants are charged with terrorism offenses related to hostage-taking and killing of 4 Americans, as well as citizens of Great Britain and Japan.
The suspects, Alexander Cody and El Shafi El Sheikh, were detained in Syria in 2018. They have been in American military custody in Iraq for the past year and were flown to the U.S. to face trial this week. They have been stripped of their British citizenship. The pair were allegedly involved in the deaths of Goto Kenji and Yukawa Haruna from Japan in 2015. Cody and El Sheikh made their first appearance at federal court in the state of Virginia on Wednesday. As tensions mount around the world, Russia has been beefing up its military. Now Moscow says it's test-fired a cruise missile that can travel at many times the speed of sound. On Wednesday, it released footage showing the Zircon missile spewing flames and zooming into the sky off the country's northwest coast. A military chief reported the test launch to President Vladimir Putin by video link. He said the missile flew at a height of 28 kilometers, reaching over 8 times the speed of sound. It hit a target about 450 kilometers away in around 4.5 minutes. Putin praised the test.
Having new and unique armament systems in our Army and Navy undoubtedly provides the defense capabilities our country needs in the long term.
Безусловно, и на долгосрочную перспективу обеспечивают обороноспособность нашего государства.
The United States and China have also been developing so-called hypersonic weapons, which are expected to be able to penetrate existing missile defense systems. Moscow could be trying to keep the U.S. in check with the test, as Washington has been building a large-scale missile defense network. The Japanese government says it expects the country's crude steel output this year to be the lowest in about half a century, as the economy continues to feel the effects of the coronavirus. The Industry Ministry says crude steel production in 2020 will be about 82 million tons, down 17.2% from last year. The estimate is based on figures from January through September, plus projected demand for the remaining 3 months. The total would be the lowest since 1969. Japanese steelmakers shut down blast furnaces in the spring as the pandemic drove down demand. But orders are slowly picking up, and Nippon Steel plans to restart one site near Tokyo next month. JFE Steel also resumed operations at a furnace in western Japan last month as demand from the auto industry rebounded. But Industry Ministry officials warn it's too early to call it a recovery and say demand will remain unstable for the duration of the pandemic. An abandoned military facility in western Japan has recently given up some secrets from the Second World War. They were uncovered not by historians, but a group of amateur researchers. NHK Road's Enoshima Airi reports.
These students are visiting Kurahashi Island in Hiroshima Prefecture. They've come to see the ruins of war. Their guide is Yanai Toshihiro. He lives on the island and is in charge of a volunteer tour group.
Some people actually died here during experiments when gunpowder exploded.
Kurahashi Island is part of the city of Kure, an important base for the Imperial Japanese Navy until the end of World War II. The huge battleship Yamato was built here. After the war, many of the military facilities in the area were demolished by occupying forces. But there are still more than 10 ruins on the island from that period. This brick building housed offices. And this area was used to test artillery, including cannon shells for the battleship Yamato. Yanai and his group have been researching these ruins for more than 10 years. It hasn't been easy. Many of the related documents were destroyed or lost. The group has interviewed a few islanders who remember that time. Those residents say authorities never officially informed them about the artillery tests. One person remembers that their house shook as if it had been struck by an earthquake. That wasn't the only disruption to their lives.
Military policemen would often monitor residents to ensure the secrecy of the base.
According to documents discovered by Yanai's group, some military personnel died in explosions and other accidents. The actual number of casualties remains unknown. 14 years ago, the volunteer group began holding annual memorial services for those who died.
Before our peaceful lives, people on the island in those days made many sacrifices. That's why we can live happily. I often think about that.
The number of people with first-hand experience of the war is dwindling. Yanai hopes the ruins will help ensure that the tragic episodes from the island's past are not forgotten. Enoshima Airi, NHK World, Hiroshima.